I think this has been such a transformational phase for everyone, not just from a business perspective, but also from a personal perspective. And I genuinely feel that the future has been drawn to the present. I think that many of the technological facilities that we have available are now been accelerated and integrated into our working lives. And clearly our working practices have changed dramatically. If I talk about the region which I represent, which is the Middle East, working from home and flexible working practices were not particularly predominant. But of course, that has all changed over the last 6 to 8 months. And now our bank is almost entirely now working remotely from home. And so clearly the working practices from a professional perspective have completely transformed. How do we learn from that, or what impact does that have? Well, from a business perspective, it's clearly it's changed the way that we interact. Some for the good, some perhaps not so positive, but certainly what we find is that actually the adoption of video technology has enabled us to have more frequent, perhaps more meaningful interactions with our clients. We have clients that are based in multiple geographies, multiple countries, and historically, of course, we've visited them physically, and that requires planning, that requires expense. But throughout this period, for our existing clients, we found that it's far more efficient. We've been able to have far more, I would say, frequent contact with them in a more meaningful way through this technology. I think clearly there's some limitations there as well. So for new business expansion, it's much harder to engage with new clients without physical meetings. So there's, of course, some limitations to the technology. So the working practices have most definitely transformed through this period. From a market infrastructure perspective, we've seen, as mentioned by the other members, that the infrastructure themselves, the exchanges and the depositories, their business continuity processes have very much stood up to the test. So they have been proved to be robust. And I think that's the case in the Middle East region and across the world. So I think that is a real positive that has come out of this. But there are also clearly areas where the infrastructure, the market infrastructures need to adapt. In the Middle East region, a number of the depositories still have dedicated terminals for trade confirmations with dedicated lines from the market participants to the depositories. That is not compatible with remote working and with flexible working practices. So there are most definitely some infrastructure changes that are going to be required to adapt to this new environment that we now face. And some of the markets in our region have already taken steps towards this. I think Saudi Arabia is a good example where there has been a tremendous shift in what was a relatively antiquated infrastructure, moving now towards implementing swift technology communications, which then can interact with ourselves as a market participant, where we adopt from a custody platform perspective, web-based platforms which can be used remotely. So I think that is one area which certainly will change, and we're seeing change from a market perspective in our region. I think a couple of other key areas which have had massive change are the holding of annual general meetings. So regulation, particularly in our part of the world, requires physical meetings historically, and then the participation of voting also is required from a physical presence. We're now seeing the adoption of technology and the change in regulation to allow virtual meetings, and First Abu Dhabi Bank conducted the first virtual meeting in the UAE. And so certainly I see that those developments will continue to occur. I think an interesting development has also been that, whilst I said that it's not conducive towards new business, we've seen that virtual due diligence and virtual meetings we've conducted a number of those now, so the working practices can obviously need to adapt to the requirements of the industry. And so we found effective ways of ensuring that those practices continue virtually, and I think that is certainly something that's going to continue in the future.